They mocked the woman in row 9 for her hijab. Called her dangerous, tried to throw her off the plane. The pilot stepped in. Hours later, both engines died over the Atlantic. That same pilot whispered one word to save them all. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The boarding process for Flight 447 from Dallas to Munich had devolved into chaos. What should have been a routine international departure had turned into something far uglier, and Captain Sarah Chen could hear it all from the cockpit. "Ma'am, you need to go back to your seat," a flight attendant's strained voice carried through the open cockpit door. "I'm not sitting next to her," a man's voice boomed. "I paid good money for this ticket, and I shouldn't have to." Sarah set down her pre-flight checklist and exchanged a glance with her co-pilot, Marcus Webb. His jaw tightened, but before either of them could move, the situation escalated. "Sir, please lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers." "Disturbing? You want to talk about disturbing? Look at her. She's wearing one of those things on her head. How do I know she's not?" The cabin fell silent. Sarah's hand froze on the door handle. "Excuse me?" A woman's voice, calm but edged with steel, cut through the tension. "What exactly are you implying? Don't play dumb. We all know what's going on in the world. I have a right to feel safe on this plane." Sarah was already moving. She stepped into the first-class cabin and assessed the scene instantly. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit stood in the aisle, red-faced and aggressive. In seat 9A, a young woman in a burgundy hijab sat with her carry-on still in her lap, her face a careful mask of composure that Sarah recognized immediately, the expression of someone who'd been through this before and was trying not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. Other passengers were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable. A few were recording on their phones. One woman in row 7 was nodding along with the angry man's tirade. But Sarah also noticed a teenager in row 10 who looked distressed, an elderly couple shaking their heads in disapproval, and a businessman who'd started to stand up as if to intervene before thinking better of it. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded fighter jets in combat zones. The man whirled on her. "Yes, there's a problem. I'm not sitting next to. You're in seat 9B. Sarah cut him off, glancing at his boarding pass. "That's right, and I want to be moved. Immediately. This is unacceptable. Unfortunately, the flight is completely full. There are no other seats available." Sarah's tone remained professional, almost pleasant. "So here are your options: you can take your assigned seat and behave appropriately, or you can leave the aircraft. Those are your only two choices." The man's face purpled. "Do you know who I am? I'm a platinum member. I fly this route twice a month for business. I will have your job for this. I'll call corporate. I'll blast this all over social media. You're discriminating against me now." "Sir, I'm not discriminating against anyone. I'm enforcing our policy that all passengers will be treated with respect and dignity. You're currently violating that policy. She's the security risk, not me." Sarah felt her patience wearing thin. She'd dealt with this kind of attitude before, in the military, in civilian life, everywhere. The entitlement. The casual bigotry dressed up as concern. The absolute certainty that their prejudice was justified. "I'm Captain Chen. I'm in command of this aircraft, and I've just given you your options. Please decide now. You're delaying departure for 247 other passengers." She paused, then added with steel in her voice, "And sir, I've been flying for 15 years. I've transported everyone from admirals to refugees, from CEOs to students, from every country and every background you can imagine. Not once has someone's religion, ethnicity, or clothing posed a threat to flight safety. Your behavior right now, however, is disrupting this aircraft. So I'll ask one more time, are you taking your seat, or are you leaving? For a moment, the man seemed ready to continue his tirade. Then he looked at Sarah's uniform, at the 4 stripes on her shoulders, at the absolute certainty in her eyes, and something in her expression made him reconsider. He grabbed his bag and stalked toward the exit, muttering curses under his breath. "We'll retrieve your checked luggage," Sarah called after him. "Have a nice day." As the man disappeared down the jet bridge, a smattering of applause broke out in the cabin. The teenager in row 10 was clapping enthusiastically. The elderly couple nodded their approval. Even some of the passengers who'd been silent were now smiling. Sarah held up a hand. "Thank you, but that's not necessary. This is simply how we treat people, with respect. Always." She turned to the flight attendants who'd been handling the situation. "Thank you for your professionalism. Let's get everyone else boarded." Then she approached the woman in 9A. "Let's get you settled," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "I'm sorry you had to experience that." The woman looked up, and Sarah saw the moisture gathering in her eyes that she was fighting to hold back. "Thank you, Captain. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Sarah squeezed her shoulder briefly. "Nobody should have to endure that kind of treatment. Welcome aboard. We'll take good care of you." "I'm Layla," the woman said quietly. "Dr. Layla Rahman." "Dr. Rahman." Sarah smiled. "What takes you to Munich?" "A conference. I'm presenting research on renewable energy, solar panel technology." Layla managed a small smile. "Though right now I'm wondering if I should have just stayed home." "I'm glad you didn't. The world needs people like you." Sarah glanced at the empty seat beside Layla, 9B, now vacant. "Looks like you've got the row to yourself now." Silver lining. Layla actually laughed at that, a small sound but genuine. "Thank you, Captain Chen." "Sarah. And you're welcome." Back in the cockpit, Marcus was already coordinating with the gate agents about the removed passengers' luggage. "That was handled perfectly," he said. "Though I have a feeling we're going to get some angry calls." "Let them call." Sarah strapped back into her seat and resumed the pre-flight check. "Nobody gets to make my passengers feel unsafe because of their prejudice. Not on my plane." Marcus grinned. "You know what? I'm really glad I fly with you, Captain. That guy didn't stand a chance. He had the same chance as everyone else, to act like a decent human being. He chose differently." Sarah ran through her instrument checks. "All right, let's get this bird in the air. We've got a schedule to keep." The flight departed 20 minutes later, and for the first few hours, everything proceeded normally. Sarah and Marcus traded off flying duties, handled the standard communications with air traffic control, and monitored the aircraft systems. The cabin settled into the typical rhythm of a long-haul flight, passengers reading, watching movies, sleeping under thin airline blankets. Over the North Atlantic, Sarah left Marcus in command while she took her scheduled break. The flight attendants had prepared a small meal for the crew, and Sarah was grateful for the chance to stretch her legs and grab some coffee. She was just pouring herself a cup in the galley, chatting with Patricia, the lead flight attendant, about their families and upcoming holidays, when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. A loud bang, followed by a shuddering vibration that rippled through the entire aircraft. Sarah dropped the coffee cup and was moving before it hit the floor. Behind her, Patricia grabbed the intercom to alert the other flight attendants. Sarah burst into the cockpit as alarms began to wail. "Engine 2 failure." Marcus shouted over the noise. "I'm getting fire warnings, multiple indicators." "I've got it." Sarah slid into her seat and scanned the instruments. Her mind shifted into the hyper-focus state she'd learned flying F-18s off carrier decks, when the difference between life and death could be measured in seconds. Confirm engine 2 fire. Executing fire suppression. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. Throttle to idle. Fuel cut off, fire extinguisher discharge. The flames died, but the engine was gone. We can fly on one engine, Marcus said, his voice steadier now. We're about 800 miles from Shannon. We can divert. Another bang, louder this time. The aircraft lurched violently to the left. Engine 1 now showing abnormal vibrations. Sarah's eyes darted across the displays. Oil pressure dropping. Temperature rising. Marcus, this is not good. This was bad. This was very, very bad. We might have ingested something. A bird strike. Marcus suggested, but they both knew that was unlikely at this altitude, in the middle of the ocean. Sarah made the decision in seconds. We're not going to make it to Shannon on a failing engine. Start looking for alternatives. Anything within range. Alternative? Sarah, we're over the North Atlantic. There's nothing but ocean for hundreds of miles in every direction. Reykjavik. Iceland. Check the distance. Marcus pulled up the navigation display, his fingers flying over the controls. 900 miles northeast. But if engine 1 fails completely, then we glide. Sarah's voice was ice. Get me Reykjavik approach. Declare an emergency. And Marcus? She looked at him. Tell the flight attendants to prepare the cabin. If this goes wrong, I want everyone ready for a water landing. The word spread through the cabin like wildfire. The festive mood of an international flight evaporated, replaced by the kind of quiet terror that comes when people realize they might actually die today. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with forced calm, their training taking over even as their hands shook. In seat 9A, Dr. Layla Rahman gripped her armrests and closed her eyes. She'd been humiliated, had almost been thrown off the plane, and now she might not even survive the flight. She thought about her mother in London, waiting to hear about the conference. She thought about her father in Karachi, who'd called her just before boarding to wish her safe travels. She thought about her younger brother starting university, so proud of his scientist sister. She thought about the groundbreaking research she'd been flying to Munich to present, work on renewable energy that could help solve the climate crisis, work that had consumed the last 5 years of her life. She also thought about the captain who'd stood up for her. Captain Chen, Sarah. At least if these were her final minutes, she'd witnessed one person choosing kindness over fear. One person refusing to let hatred win. That was something. In the cockpit, Sarah was running calculations in her head. Engine 1 was still producing power, but it was degrading fast. The oil temperature was climbing into the red zone. The vibrations were getting worse. Any minute now, it could seize completely, or worse, tear itself apart and damage the aircraft further. Shannon is diverting traffic for us, but they're saying the winds are not in our favor, Marcus reported, his voice tight. We'd be flying into a headwind the entire way. 30 to 40 knots. Reykjavik. Tailwind point 15 to 20 knots. We'd be going with the wind. Marcus looked at her. But Sarah, it's farther. If the engine quits. She stared at the instruments, running the numbers. This was the kind of decision that could haunt a pilot forever. The safe choice, or what seemed like the safe choice, was Shannon. Closer, larger airport, better equipped for emergencies. But with a failing engine and a strong headwind, would they even make it? They'd be fighting the wind the entire way, burning more fuel, putting more strain on an engine that was already dying. Reykjavik was farther in terms of distance, but with the wind behind them, they'd cover the distance faster. Less time on the failing engine. Less fuel burned. It was counterintuitive, but the math was clear. We go to Reykjavik. Tell them we're coming. Copy that. Marcus keyed the radio. Reykjavik Control, this is Transatlantic 447, declaring an emergency. Dual engine failure, 247 souls on board, requesting priority landing, any available runway. The Icelandic controller's calm voice came back immediately, professional and reassuring. Transatlantic 447, Reykjavik control copies your emergency. You are cleared direct to Keflavik Airport. We are clearing all traffic. All runways available, emergency services standing by. What is your fuel status? Sufficient for landing, Sarah interjected, taking over the radio. But we need vectors for fastest route. Our engine situation is deteriorating. Understood, 447. Turn right heading 045. We have you on radar. You are cleared to descend to flight level 280 at pilot's discretion. Sarah nodded grimly. Now came the hard part, keeping the aircraft in the air long enough to reach land. She addressed the cabin over the PA system. Her voice was calm, steady, almost casual, the tone she'd perfected during combat missions when she needed her squadron to stay focused despite the missiles being fired at them. The tone that said, "I've got this, trust me, we're going to be fine." Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chen. As you may have noticed, we've experienced a mechanical issue with our engines. We're diverting to Keflavik Airport in Iceland, where we'll make a safe landing. Our flight attendants are going to brief you on emergency procedures. This is purely precautionary. I need everyone to listen carefully to their instructions and remain calm. We've trained for exactly this scenario, and I'm confident we'll have you on the ground safely within the hour. I'll keep you updated as we proceed. What she didn't say, they had maybe 45 minutes before engine 1 failed completely. What she didn't say, if that engine quit before they reached land, they'd be attempting a water landing in the North Atlantic at night, in the dark, with swells running high. What she didn't say, their survival odds in that scenario were slim at best. In the cabin, the flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, demonstrating brace positions and emergency exits one more time. Their training had prepared them for this, but training was different from reality. Several attendants were visibly shaking. Patricia, the lead flight attendant with 30 years of experience, caught Sarah's eye through the cockpit door and gave a firm nod. They were scared, but they'd do their jobs. They'd take care of the passengers. Layla found herself helping the elderly woman in the seat next to her, 9C, across the aisle, understand the safety instructions. The woman didn't speak much English, and she was clearly terrified. Layla's fear transformed into focus. She was a scientist, trained to stay analytical under pressure, trained to solve problems. If these were her last moments, she'd face them with dignity. And she'd help this frightened stranger face them too. "Have you flown much?" the elderly woman asked in halting English, her voice quavering. "Quite a bit," Layla replied, managing a smile. "The pilots know what they're doing." That captain, the one who spoke. "She's excellent. We'll be okay." She hoped desperately that she wasn't lying. In the cockpit, Sarah was performing a delicate balancing act. Too much power on the remaining engine and it might fail catastrophically, might tear itself apart in a burst of metal shrapnel. Too little and they'd lose altitude they couldn't afford to lose. She adjusted the throttle with minute precision, her eyes constantly scanning the engine instruments. "Oil temperature is still climbing," Marcus reported. "Pressure down to 30 psi and falling. How long can we run it? Manual says we should shut it down now. But then we're gliding, and we're not in gliding range of Iceland yet." Sarah's jaw tightened. "We keep it running. How's our fuel situation?" "Burning faster than normal on one engine, but we'll have enough. Assuming the engine doesn't quit." "It won't quit." Sarah said it like a command, as if she could force the dying engine to obey through sheer willpower. "It's going to hold together because it has to." 20 minutes crawled by. Then 30. The coastline of Iceland appeared on their radar, still 100 miles away. Engine 1 was screaming now, the vibrations so severe that Sarah could feel them through the control yoke, through her seat, through her entire body. "Oil pressure down to 20, Marcus said quietly. "Temperature in the red. Sarah, we need to consider ditching procedures." We should brief the cabin on water landing. Not yet. Her eyes fixed on the radar display. There, Vestmannaeyjar, the Westman Islands. They're closer than Keflavik. Significantly closer. Those are tiny islands. What kind of runway? Doesn't matter. It's land. It's solid ground. Get me their airport. Now. Marcus worked frantically, pulling up charts and information. I've got it, Vestmannaeyjar Airport. Sarah, runway is only 4,100 feet long. That's barely enough for a small regional jet, let alone a wide body like this. We need at least 6,000 feet normally. Normally we also have 2 functioning engines. It'll have to be enough. Tell them we're coming in. The transmission went out. The response came back immediately from a startled Icelandic controller, Transatlantic 447, Vestmannaeyjar Tower, advise you divert to Keflavik. Vestmannaeyjar runway is not rated for aircraft your size. We do not have adequate emergency services. Sarah keyed the mic, her voice firm. Vestmannaeyjar Tower, Keflavik isn't an option. Our engine won't last that long. Vestmannaeyjar is what we've got. Clear the runway and have every emergency vehicle you can find ready. We're coming in hot. There was a long pause. Then, understood, 447. Runway is yours. We're clearing all traffic. Emergency services responding, Godspeed, Captain. Sarah switched to the cabin PA, flight attendants, prepare the cabin for emergency landing. Passengers, assume brace positions on my command. In seat 9A, Layla Rahman took a deep breath. She thought about saying a prayer, then realized she'd been praying this entire time, a continuous stream of prayer running beneath her fear. She reached over and squeezed the elderly woman's hand across the aisle. Here we go, she whispered. Stay strong. Sarah had the island in sight now. Small, volcanic, dark and forbidding in the night. She could see the single runway, a strip of concrete that looked impossibly short from their altitude. It looked like a postage stamp. Gear down, she ordered. Gear down, Marcus confirmed. 3 green lights. At least something was working properly. Flaps 30. Flaps 30. Engine 1's temperature was in the critical zone, past anything Sarah had ever seen in training or real life. Any second now it could seize, could explode. Sarah adjusted their approach angle. They were coming in fast, too fast for the short runway, way too fast, but she had no choice. Slower meant more power, and more power meant the engine would fail sooner. 500 feet, Marcus called out. 400, 300. Sarah could see the emergency vehicles lining the runway, lights flashing blue and red. She could see the foam they'd laid down on the concrete in preparation. She could see the people watching from the small terminal building, probably wondering if they were about to witness a disaster. 200 feet. 100. The runway rushed up to meet them. Sarah pulled back on the yoke, flared the nose up, and felt the main wheels kiss the concrete with a thump that reverberated through the entire aircraft. She deployed the thrust reversers on the dead engines, they still provided aerodynamic braking, and stood on the wheel brakes with everything she had. The aircraft hurtled down the runway. The end was approaching fast. Too fast. We're not going to stop, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled panic. Yes, we are. Sarah applied maximum braking. The tires screamed in protest. The brakes heated to dangerous levels. The aircraft's computer was warning her she was about to blow the tires, but she didn't care. Better to blow every tire on the plane than run off the end of the runway and into whatever lay beyond. The nose dipped as the brakes bit harder. The end of the runway was 100 feet away. Then 50. Then 30. They stopped. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The cockpit was silent except for the wailing alarms and the hissing of overheated brakes. Sarah looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Sarah. Did we just, Marcus started. Yeah, Sarah breathed. We did. Then she keyed the PA, her voice surprisingly steady. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Iceland. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is off and the flight attendants advise that it's safe to deplane. On behalf of myself and the entire crew, thank you for your patience and cooperation. The cabin erupted. Cheers, crying, applause, people hugging strangers, some passengers openly sobbing with relief. Sarah slumped in her seat, suddenly aware that her hands were shaking, that her entire body was shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the crushing weight of what had almost happened. The emergency evacuation was textbook perfect. Patricia and her team guided passengers off the aircraft with calm efficiency. Within 15 minutes, all 247 passengers and crew were safely off the aircraft, standing on the tarmac of the tiny island airport, wrapped in emergency blankets that the islanders had rushed to provide, drinking hot coffee that materialized from somewhere. Layla found herself standing near the nose of the aircraft, staring up at the massive plane that had carried them all safely to Earth against impossible odds. The emergency lights cast strange shadows on the fuselage. She could see the smoke still rising from the overheated brakes. A woman in a captain's uniform approached, Captain Chen, Sarah, the pilot who'd saved them all. Dr. Ramon. Sarah said. She'd learned the passenger's name from the manifest, had checked it after their interaction during boarding. Layla turned, surprised. Yes. I wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay. After everything that happened before we even left Dallas, and then this. You remember me? Of course I remember you. How could I forget? Sarah managed a tired smile. I'm sorry your flight was eventful. Layla surprised herself by laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. Eventful. That's one word for it. She studied the captain's face, exhausted, pale, but calm. Composed. Captain Chen, can I ask you something? Call me Sarah. Sarah, then. That man on the plane, before we took off. You didn't have to stand up for me like that. You could have just moved me to another seat, avoided the confrontation entirely. Why didn't you? Why did you put yourself in that position? Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Can I ask what you do for a living? I'm a research scientist. Renewable energy. I was heading to Munich to present my work on next-generation solar panels that could revolutionize how we capture and store solar energy. Important work. I'd like to think so. If we can get it implemented on a large scale, it could help address the climate crisis. Then I especially couldn't let him make you feel unwelcome. Sarah smiled slightly. But honestly, even if you weren't doing important work, even if you were just a tourist flying to Munich for vacation, or a student visiting family, or anyone else, I still would have done exactly the same thing. Nobody gets to treat my passengers like that. Nobody. Not ever. Layla felt tears prick her eyes, the emotions of the day finally overwhelming her. Thank you. For that, and for getting us down safely. That was the most incredible flying I've ever witnessed. That shouldn't have been possible. Sarah shrugged, suddenly looking vulnerable. Just doing my job. That was more than just doing your job. That was. Layla shook her head. Where did you learn to fly like that? U.S. Navy. I flew F-18s off carriers for 10 years. Combat missions, carrier landings at night in rough seas, the works. Sarah paused. My call sign was Phoenix. Phoenix, Layla repeated softly. Rising from the ashes. Something like that. They gave it to me after I managed to land a damaged fighter jet after taking fire over hostile territory. I was the only pilot in my squadron who could consistently land on the carrier in weather that grounded everyone else. She looked back at the aircraft. Seems appropriate tonight. One of the Icelandic emergency responders approached, a young man speaking rapid Icelandic and gesturing enthusiastically. Sarah's co-pilot Marcus appeared from somewhere and translated. He'd picked up some of the language during previous layovers. They want to know how we managed to land on such a short runway, Marcus said, his own voice still shaky with residual adrenaline. They're saying it shouldn't have been possible. The aircraft is too big, too heavy. The runway is too short. They're calling it a miracle. Sarah looked back at the aircraft, at the smoking brakes, at the tire marks stretching the entire length of the runway and beyond onto the overrun area. They'd stopped with maybe 20 feet to spare. Maybe less. Tell them, Sarah said quietly, that sometimes impossible is just what you do when there's no other option. When you have 247 people depending on you, impossible becomes possible. It has to. The story spread quickly. By the time the passengers were ferried by small boats and planes to Reykjavik and then onward to their destinations over the next day, news crews were already descending on Iceland. The footage of the massive aircraft sitting on the tiny island runway was dramatic, almost surreal. The story of the dual-engine failure over the ocean, the split-second decision to divert to a runway that was technically too short, the perfect landing, it was the kind of story that captivated the world. But what captured people's attention even more was the video that surfaced, recorded by a passenger on their phone, of what happened before the flight even took off. The confrontation with the prejudiced passenger. Captain Chen's calm, firm handling of the situation. Her absolute refusal to let hatred and fear drive her decisions. The video went viral. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed 50 million times. Within a week, 100 million. News organizations picked it up and ran segments. Social media exploded with commentary. Hashtags trended, hashtag Captain Chen, hashtag Phoenix Pilot, hashtag Fly with Respect. Some praised Sarah as a hero, not just for the emergency landing, but for standing up against discrimination, for treating all passengers with equal dignity. Others, predictably, criticized her for making it political or putting her personal views ahead of passenger safety or discriminating against the white male passenger. Sarah ignored all of it. She wrote her detailed reports, underwent the mandatory post-incident medical and psychological evaluations, and waited for the investigation into what had caused the dual-engine failure. The preliminary findings suggested catastrophic failure of a turbine blade in Engine 2, which had sent debris shooting into Engine 1's intake. A maintenance oversight, possibly a manufacturing defect. The investigation would continue for months, possibly years. 3 weeks after the incident, Sarah was preparing for her return to flight status. She'd been cleared by the medical team and the psychological evaluator, though she still occasionally woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, reliving those terrifying minutes over the Atlantic. The airline's brass had been surprisingly supportive, perhaps because the media coverage had been largely positive and passenger bookings had actually increased. Everyone wanted to fly with the pilot who landed on an island. There was talk of commendations, awards, maybe even a book deal, though Sarah had politely declined all interview requests. She was at home reviewing paperwork, preparing for her next scheduled flight, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Captain Chen. This is Dr. Layla Rahman. From Flight 447. I don't know if you remember me. Of course I remember you, Layla. How are you? I'm well. Better than well, actually. I'm calling because I wanted to thank you again. And to tell you that because of what happened, because of what you did, something fundamental changed for me. Oh. I've spent years being quiet. Being polite. Not making waves. Every time someone made a comment about my hijab, every time I got pulled aside for random additional screening at airports, every time someone moved away from me on a train or a bus, every time a colleague made an innocent joke. I just accepted it. Tried not to cause trouble, tried to be the good Muslim who doesn't complain. Layla's voice grew stronger. But watching you stand up, watching you refuse to let that man's hatred win, watching you risk your career to do what was right, it reminded me that staying quiet isn't neutral. It's complicity. Silence in the face of injustice is its own form of violence. I'm glad, Sarah said softly, feeling emotion swell in her chest. What are you going to do? I'm speaking up. I gave a talk at my university about my experience, both the discrimination and the heroism I witnessed. I'm working with an organization that trains airline personnel on implicit bias and discrimination. I'm writing articles. Speaking at conferences, not just about my research, but about my experiences. And I'm not going to be quiet anymore when I see injustice. Even small injustices. Especially small injustices, because those are the ones that wear people down day after day until they forget they deserve better. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest, felt tears prick her eyes. That's wonderful, Layla. Really. I'm so proud of you. There's something else. My research, the solar panel technology one was supposed to present in Munich. I finally gave that presentation last week, 2 weeks late. And I pitched it to investors. Fully funded, Sarah. 3 different companies want to license the technology. We're going into production next year. My work is going to make a real difference. Layla's voice caught. I thought you'd want to know that the person you stood up for that day, she's going to change the world a little bit. And it's partly because you reminded her that she deserves to take up space in it. You were always going to change the world, Sarah said, her voice thick. I just made sure you got to Munich to do it. Eventually. They talked for a few more minutes, exchanging email addresses, promising to stay in touch. After they hung up, Sarah sat for a long moment, phone in hand, thinking about the strange way that moments connect. How standing up against one man's prejudice led to safely landing a damaged aircraft, led to inspiring a scientist to speak up, led to renewable energy technology getting funded, led to who knows what else. The butterfly effect, she thought. Small actions rippling outward in ways you could never predict or measure. Her phone rang again. This time it was her supervisor at the airline. Captain Chen, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, sir. I wanted to personally inform you of your next assignment. The board has specifically requested you for something special. Oh. We're launching a new route. Dallas to Karachi, Pakistan, direct service. It's a big deal for us, expanding our South Asian network, building cultural bridges, all that. And after everything that happened, after the way you handled both the incident on the ground and in the air, well, we want you to fly the inaugural route. Show the world what we stand for as an airline. Sarah smiled. I'd be honored, sir. Excellent. We'll have more details soon, but I wanted you to know. And Sarah? What you did, both on that flight and before it, that's the kind of leadership we need. Thank you. After she hung up, Sarah sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the Dallas skyline. She thought about the path that had led here. All those years in the Navy, flying combat missions, landing on carriers in rough seas, proving herself again and again in a male-dominated field. The transition to commercial aviation, the thousands of routine flights, the extraordinary emergencies. The small moments of standing up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to look away. It all mattered. It all connected. Every choice, every action, every moment of courage. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the gate in Dallas, preparing to board Flight 1 to Karachi. It was a media event, the airline's first direct route to Pakistan, part of their expanded South Asian service. There were cameras, reporters, airline executives in their finest suits giving speeches about global connections and cultural bridges and bringing people together. Sarah tuned it all out. She was focused on her pre-flight routine, on the weather reports for the 16-hour flight, on making sure her crew was ready. She had a job to do, and the media circus was just distraction. As she walked through the boarding door, she caught sight of someone in the first-class cabin. Row 3, Seat A, Dr. Layla Rahman, smiling broadly, waving. Sarah walked over, genuinely delighted. "Dr. Rahman. Fancy meeting you here. When I heard you were flying this inaugural route, I changed my tickets. I have a conference in Karachi, seemed fitting to be on this flight. Seemed important to be here. I'm glad you're here. Truly." Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "Get comfortable. It's a long flight, but I promise, no emergency landings this time. I trust you, Captain Phoenix." Layla grinned. "Besides, if anyone can get us there safely, it's you." Sarah laughed and headed to the cockpit. As she ran through her pre-flight checklist with Marcus, who'd specifically requested to fly with her again, she thought about the path that had led here. All those years of training, of sacrifice, of proving herself, of standing up for what was right even when it was hard. It all mattered. It all connected. Every single moment. "Ready, Captain?" Marcus asked from the co-pilot's seat. "Ready," Sarah confirmed. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. As they taxied to the runway, Sarah keyed the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chen. Welcome aboard Flight 1 to Karachi. We've got beautiful conditions for flying today, and we're expecting smooth skies for most of our journey. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. We'll have you in Pakistan in about 16 hours. And thank you for flying with us, it's an honor to be your captain today." She switched off the PA and advanced the throttles. The aircraft surged forward, accelerating down the runway with that familiar rush of power that still thrilled her after all these years. At rotation speed, Sarah pulled back on the yoke, and the massive plane lifted gracefully into the Texas sky. Behind her, in the cabin, 247 passengers settled in for the journey. In row 3A, Layla Rahman pulled out her laptop, ready to work on her presentation, the same one she'd been carrying that night over the Atlantic, now updated with funding announcements and implementation timelines. In row 15C, a young Pakistani-American girl looked out the window at the lights of Dallas falling away below and dreamed of becoming a pilot someday, inspired by the stories she'd heard about Captain Chen. In row 28F, an elderly man who'd emigrated from Pakistan 40 years ago and never thought he'd return to his homeland wept quietly with joy at the thought of seeing his village again. And scattered throughout the cabin were others, students, businesspeople, families, individuals from every background imaginable, all sharing this moment, this journey, this flight that represented something larger than just transportation. In the cockpit, Captain Sarah Chen, Phoenix, flew them all safely toward tomorrow, 1 mile at a time. She thought about the letter she'd received last week from a young Muslim woman who'd watched the viral video and decided to apply to flight school. She thought about the messages from passengers who'd thanked her for making them feel safe, for standing up, for showing that kindness and strength weren't mutually exclusive. She thought about how one moment of choosing courage over comfort had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. As they reached cruising altitude and the autopilot took over, Sarah looked out at the endless sky stretching before them. Somewhere out there, across this ocean she'd once nearly crashed into, across continents and cultures and all the artificial boundaries humans drew between each other, was their destination. But really, she thought, they were already exactly where they needed to be. In the air, together, moving forward. Phoenix rising. Always rising. 1 year later, Dr. Layla Rahman stood on a stage in Stockholm, accepting an international award for her renewable energy technology. The solar panels her team had developed were now being installed across 3 continents, providing clean energy to communities that had never had reliable electricity before. In her acceptance speech, she talked about her research, her team, the science. But she also talked about a flight, a pilot, and a moment that reminded her she deserved to take up space in the world. "Someone once told me that sometimes impossible is just what you do when there's no other option," Layla said to the assembled crowd. "Captain Sarah Chen taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to do what's right despite the fear. Whether that's landing a plane on an impossible runway or standing up to hatred when it would be easier to look away. I carry that lesson with me every day. In Dallas, Sarah watched the award ceremony on her phone during a layover. She smiled, shook her head in wonder, and then headed to her gate. She had another flight to catch, more passengers to transport safely, more miles to fly. Just another day of doing what she loved, being who she was, standing up for what she believed in. Just another day of rising. Like a phoenix. Again and again and again.